Good morning. Today is the 27th day of First Adar and the 7th of March. And we're in the middle of the major parables, the super parables in Chasidus. So we talked about the man metaphor. Man is a metaphor. And there was a lot to say about this, but I do want to continue because Yaakov's coming back soon. The wedding was yesterday, so we extend him Mazal Tov, Mazal Tov. And okay, so let's see. This too, in a sense, follows on the above mentioned principle of a terrestrial supernal correspondence. But even while an understanding of the soul is helpful in understanding matters relating to divinity, this is but an anthropomorphic approximation which cannot be carried too far and needs to be qualified. It must be remembered, as Rabbi Shneur Zalman points out, meaning the Alter Rebbe, that in some respects the analogy breaks down and is completely inadequate. And he writes in the Tanya in chapter 42, this parallels only to appease the ear. In truth, however, the analogy has no similarity whatever to the object of comparison. For the human soul is affected by the accidents of the body and its pain, while the Holy One, blessed is He, is not, heaven forbid, affected by the accidents of the world and its changes, nor by the word itself. Should be by the world itself. They do not affect any change in him. So again,
him, but yet he controls him.
Right. So that's the important thing that we always say. Ani Havaya Lo Shaniti. I Hashem have not changed. Something's wrong with my thing. I don't know why. I don't know. I hope it works. So I Hashem have not changed, and what they mean by that, maybe there is some here. What's meant by that is that he is not affected by reality. That's what they mean to say. People take this into he doesn't change at all, and that is a problem. Because if that's true, if God does not change, then what do we mean by prayer? What is prayer for? So the explanation.
It's not reflective.
Right. If it's not reflective, then what is it?
What is it?
And it seems to be that we're talking to God. So what exactly does that even mean? What does it mean to talk to God if He's not listening? He's listening, but He's not changing,
or
not doing anything about it.
Static, yeah.
So the answer is, as usual, in Chasidus, in Chabad, the answer will be that everything that does change is within the realm of His Malchus, the kingdom of the infinite. All this is well and good.
Okay.
But what he said here, that he's not affected, there's a contradiction to a verse that we know. The verse says, "B'chol tzaratam lo tzar," that in all their pain, he suffers also. And there's two readings to this verse. There's a difference between the reading and the way it's written. The way it's read is that he does
Feel.
He does, as it were, take part in all the suffering.
Right.
The way it's written is that lotza with an aleph, that he doesn't take. He's above it. He's aloof of it.
Yes.
So we said that really, what are we saying? We're saying that on the one hand, you have to embrace the analogy. On the other hand, when it becomes strong enough, you have to let it go. And the way he wrote it, it doesn't reflect that run and return that you need to have. But we
explain it a little bit. In other words, the idea that he does, and then we go to where he doesn't.
Right, because it's sort of like saying, if a person's stuck in a prison and he needs help from the outside. So on the one hand, he needs the person on the outside to understand his predicament.
Right.
He needs him to be, as it were, inside with him. On the other hand, if he's going to be inside with him, he's no good. He has to be outside of it. Right. So Hashem, in that sense, according to this, is exactly this type of arrangement. Let's say, on the one hand, he's with me, and that's why I am not lost. I don't feel despair. I feel that there's a chance. There's a possibility.
It's like if you expand that muscle. In other words, someone on the outside will help. But if he's in, he's no good to you.
Right.
But yet then it's a paradox in a sense. But you keep
Exactly.
the image, so to speak, of that person who's going to help you.
Right.
Is that?
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, it has to be with you. Otherwise, if it's not with you, you're going to despair.
So it's a living paradox.
Right. So
how do we go to it? But then at the end, we're isolated alone.
right. So any memoir that you read of someone in a prison, they usually contain this paradox. The one that's strongest in my eyes, in my opinion, is Anatoly Sharansky's Fear No Evil, where he has his wife, who he's only married, I think they married 2 weeks or a week before he was put into prison for 9 years in the Gulag. And yet the memory of her is what kept him going.
Oh, it's a Viktor Frankl thing,
Right. It's a Viktor Frankl thing.
Yeah.
So these things are, again, if you look, he's writing it like a little bit like a philosopher. And in philosophy, they don't like analogies like what I just said. What do you mean you're in prison? It's not how we do philosophy. It's got to be more logical, more rigorous. But Chasidus is very much about the state of the psyche, so the person's psychology. So these are real considerations, and that's how we understand this, that Hashem has to both be inside and outside at the same time. And then you have also this again this idea that he puts his Shechina, his divine presence, with us, and the divine presence is with us all the time. So you can say, this is not God, but it's not true. The Shechina is also something that we consider to be godly, and we try to understand it. We try to relate to it. So all these things, what I'm saying is that it's everything he's writing is obviously true, and he's quoting something from the Tanya, but the Tanya also, he's very, at one point he'll say this, at another point he'll say that, depending on what he's talking about.
Context.
Yeah. Also, the soul and the body are actually distinct, one from the other, in their very sources. So this is, Baruch Hashem, this is a very important thing. For the source of the body and its essence does not come into being from the soul. That's something that a lot of people don't know. People think that the body comes out of the soul. But no amount, what he writes is no amount of thickening of the spiritual, he calls it, will become material. Material has a separate source altogether. It cannot be, and this is something we talked about actually. We said that the spiritual and the material have two completely different ways of coming into being. The spiritual is called Seder Ishtalshalut. It's a gradated in non-Jewish thought, this is called the great chain of being. That one thing leads to another. It's a Platonic idea, and it means that spiritually everything begins from something. There's one big idea, let's call it, and then everything gradates from there. And so until you get to the very lowest part, so you have the lowest ideas, let's call it, or the lowest understanding, or lowest configurations. But matter is not like that at all. There is no higher and lower in matter. You can't really say that gold is higher than lead. Why? Because both of them are made out of protons, neutrons, and electrons.
I think we talked.
Yeah, so we talked about that. So we say that the matter is created ex nihilo. It's called that's being from nothing, or something from nothing. Whereas the spiritual is always something from something. It's always just it's a chain, and sometimes they call this. So that's why in the spiritual there is always a concept of infinity, which tends to work, and in the physical there's a concept of quantumness. Things skip. There's no continuity per se. There's no for there to be continuity, there has to be infinity. This is the reason for Zeno's famous.
Continuity, there has to be
right. This is the reason for Zeno's famous paradox. Zeno said, he showed this paradox in many different ways. The tortoise and the hare, the arrow that you shoot, And he says, well, there must be an infinite number of points from here to where the target is. So when you shoot the arrow has to go through all these points, and it takes a finite amount of time to go through every point. So how could the arrow ever reach the target? It should take an infinite amount of time, and that is only good in the spirit. That way of thinking again, this is continuity and division into arbitrarily small quantities, and not even quantities, but rather instead of talking about quantities, you talk about plenitude. And plenitude or continuity means that there's no separation; it's just a straight line. So there's a lot of paradox within paradox that he introduced in this whole thinking, because even in the spiritual, you can't really talk about. I mean, theoretically, you think it's this way, but there's no really infinite succession of pieces, because if they were pieces, they would be finite. So from here to here, if I say it's continuous, that's one thing. That's spiritual. If I say it's made out of an infinite number of pieces of space, so I've already switched to the material, because the moment I say finite quantity, that's material. So there's a lot of paradoxes that are solved by this, but just understanding that there are two distinct sources for the spiritual and the physical. And so the physical does not come out of the spiritual. In other words, the body is not a creation of the soul. The body is not a thickening of the soul or something like that, anything like that. They're just completely two different chains of creation, two different manners of creation. And again, the spiritual is called Seder Ishtalshelut, it's called this chain of being, and the physical is called Yesh Me'ayin, something from nothing. Okay, and there's a lot to say about that. So he says, thus while the body may be fully subordinate to the soul, they are nevertheless two distinct entities. So that means that Judaism in general, it's not just Kabbalah or anything like that, or Chasidus, is dualistic, meaning it says there's spirit and matter. This doesn't mean that you can't find in the sages a monistic, I think I mentioned this, a monistic trend. There's also some that they seem to be saying something monist, and monist would be like saying that there's only one thing. Maimonides, in his Guide to the Perplexed, in part 2, chapter 25, it's a famous chapter, that's why I remember it. He talks about a medrash that he found in Pirkei de Rabbi Shmuel. Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. It's a famous medrash which the scholars date to the 7th century, but could be. It's kind of hard to believe it's that late, but maybe it is. In any case, Maimonides saw it, and in it he sees that there's two elements created in the beginning of time. Meaning, in the story of creation, he says that these are the chronicles of the heavens and the earth, and so it's saying that there were two separate creations, heavens and earth. And he finds that very troubling. Why? Because he understands them both as matter, two forms of matter, two types of matter. Mm-hmm. And he says that I can't accept.
Can't deal with. Yeah.
So there's even, if we go according to this, so there's even three separate trends. I haven't seen this echoed in Chasidus anywhere, that there are three, but just saying that there is something like that. The light metaphor. Oh, sorry, I skipped a little bit. In contrast, in relation to God, who brings everything into existence ex nihilo, everything is absolutely nullified, just as the light of the sun is nullified in the sun itself. So he wants to say here that since God is the source, so everything is nullified to him, not like the body to the soul. It's not nullified to it. But he says it brings everything into existence ex nihilo. That isn't what we call the bringing into being of the soul. The bringing into being of the soul is called ishtalshelus. It's called chain of being. It's not the same thing as ex nihilo. So what he means is, of course, obviously right, because in a sense the soul didn't exist before God created it. But the process of creation is different. It's not something from nothing. The soul is not something from nothing. That's why the soul is considered to be eternal, whereas matter is not eternal. And yet, in Chasidus we'll find a lot of times that matter nonetheless is higher than spiritual, because again, God had to skip over all the spiritual, as it were, to create something from nothing. Because he had something. Why are you not doing it from there? Something from nothing means that I'm skipping over all of this. Okay, these are more discussions. The next point is the light metaphor, which is a very big metaphor in Chasidus.
What page are we on?
We're on page 41.
Oh, 41.
41. The book itself is not so interesting. He only has two metaphors, two super metaphors. Usually we talk about four of them, so I'll try to fill in some more of them next time.